China is set to impose a 15% tariff on select US imports in response to the US's 10% duty on Chinese goods. Meanwhile, Asian markets rebound as Trump's tariff pause on Mexico and Canada boosts investor confidence. And rising prices drive up the cost of living in Japan. Some residents are growing their own produce to save money. Hello, I'm Toba Aiden with the latest business and finance news here on TRT World. The escalation in the US-China trade war is now in effect. President Donald Trump's tariffs of 10% on all Chinese imports have now been introduced, prompting Beijing to announce retaliatory levies of 10 to 15% on some US products. Investors now fear slower global growth, higher consumer prices, and a strong US dollar. But beyond the broader impact, key industries are the hardest hit. One of the most affected sectors is the motor industry. Major global car manufacturers rely on Chinese-made parts, and increased tariffs mean higher production costs. US-based car makers will likely suffer from retaliatory tariffs imposed by China, which could hurt their access to the world's largest car market. Companies like General Motors and Ford are bracing for increased costs and potential price hikes that could affect consumer demand. The semiconductor industry is another casualty, with chipmakers such as Intel, Nvidia and Qualcomm depending on Chinese factories for essential components. Any slowdown in production or additional costs due to tariffs could ripple across the tech sector, affecting everything from smartphones to artificial intelligence development. Consumer goods companies are also under pressure, as many everyday products from clothing and appliances to electronics are sourced from China. Higher import costs may lead to increased prices for American consumers, reducing spending power and potentially slowing retail growth. Brands like Apple, which assemble many of its products in China, may need to adjust pricing strategies or shift production to alternative locations. And beyond these industries, renewable energy is another sector at risk. The tariffs threaten the affordability of solar panels, wind turbines and battery storage technology, as China is a major supplier of components for clean energy projects. Industry experts warn that increased costs could slow the transition to sustainable energy, undermining long-term climate goals. For more, we're joined by Joe Siracusa in Perth, Australia. He's a professor of security and diplomacy at Curtin University. Now, Professor, with trade tensions escalating, what does this mean for consumers facing higher products and potential economic slowdown?
Well, as you pointed out in your package, they could look forward to paying more for normal things. Manufacturers can look at the idea of paying more for parts of that kind of thing from China and vice versa kind of thing. Look, these trade wars go nowhere. And the Chinese-American relationship is the most important relationship in the world today. So engaging in a trade war, which only has negative effects, and I mean negative, it poisons diplomacy generally. It creates virulent nationalism on both sides. It goes nowhere. I mean, in fact, it's a mistake. And if you want to correct the balance of payments and that kind of thing, then you're going to have to change the international trade system. That's what this is all about. Is the international trade system is broken down, and President Trump wants to blame the Chinese, and the Chinese, of course, are not going to back down, so they're going to match President Trump step for step, and so we sort of descend. And what it does is it roils the markets. It upsets people who on Wall Street, upsets investors and the like. And, at the end of the day, it's the little person who's going to pay the bills.
And how will China's retaliatory measures impact major US industries such as the auto sector, tech and consumer goods?
Well, it could have been worse if the Canadian and the Mexican tariffs had gone through last night. I understand President Trump has backed down here, and he got a master class from the president of Mexico, Claudia Sheinbaum. Look, the Chinese would have probably factored that into it as well, and I think it's going to increase the price of everything. Now, keep in mind, the United States can get some of this stuff somewhere else. Canada, there are 40 million Canadians, and 90% of whom live within the 100 miles of America. And there are 128 Mexicans who work on these same kinds of things as the Chinese. So you can get them somewhere else. But China is playing the long game here. It reckons that Trump is just testing the waters here. And 10% was matched by 15%. So this should tell Trump's minders in Washington that the Chinese are not to be pushed around.
Right, and Presidents Trump and Xi are reportedly due to meet as soon as this week. Can we expect a trade deal between the world's two largest economies anytime soon?
Yeah, I think so. Look, both of them play to their publics. Trump's got his own public he has to worry about. He has to look tough. And Xi has to look like he's defending Chinese interests, too. So a lot of this is politics. I think the Chinese and the Americans like talking to each other behind closed doors. I mean, I think they get on famously. I think they're both on each other's feed dials. I think that's a very good thing. The Chinese regard Trump's public comments as less important as his private comments. And I think Trump's prepared to cut a deal with the Chinese if he can sell it. But keep in mind that their conversations are the results of their conversations are highly politicized. So it goes through the machinery in Beijing, goes through the party, and in America it goes through the very large consensus that runs right through Washington that the United States has an up-and-coming competitive war, maybe even a real war with the Chinese. So all this stuff tends to take second place to the political optics involved.
All right, Joe Siracusa, Professor of Security and Diplomacy at Curtin University. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Meanwhile, Asian stocks bounced back on Tuesday with the pauses on tariffs on Mexico and Canada. Japanese stocks were trading more than 1% higher, while South Korea's Kospi rose 1.5% and the small cap Kosdaq gained 3%. Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index was trading up 2%, while Chinese markets remained closed for the Lunar New Year holiday. Overnight in the US, stocks traded down following Trump's decision to pause tariffs. Let's get more on this now with Farah Murad in Dubai. She's a senior market analyst at Equity Group. Farah, markets seem to have had some relief following that pause on tariffs. Are investors hopeful that Trump will reach a deal with its top trading partners?
I mean, it seems so, but I would say this rebound is sort of unusual. I would say the markets are rewarding the least bad news instead of, or rather than clear winner. Even the markets, let's say the US market, the dollar is gaining not because of good news that would support the economy. We are expecting, in case the tariffs come into light, then it will affect the GDP by 1.6%. But that's way better than, let's say, Canada and Mexico, that their economy, GDP, might be hurt by a decrease of 14 and 16%. So at the moment, I'm not really sure how sustainable this recovery would be. Yes, we have reports that are coming better than expected in Wall Street, but I'm not really sure yet how sustainable that would be.
Now, as we mentioned, Asian shares, particularly Japanese automakers, are trading higher. What's boosted investor confidence in that sense?
I mean, still definitely good news. Whenever we have a bit of decrease of this tension between the US, Canada, and Mexico, we will see its effect worldwide. Another main factor, I would say, that the Japanese economy is export-oriented. Automobiles as well, it's something to take into consideration. It will definitely be supported. The main thing as well, this boost that we're seeing on dollar is definitely affecting the yen. A weaker yen means better performance to this export-driven economy. I think that's the main reaction that we're seeing today, instead of a, I would say, sustainable boost of confidence.
Okay, Farah Murad, Senior Market Analyst at Equity Group. We will have to leave it there. Thank you very much for your analysis.
Thank you for having me.
Now, for the fourth consecutive month, inflation in the Eurozone has continued its upward trend. In January, consumer price inflation edged up to 2.5% from 2.4% in December. This marks the highest inflation rate the region has seen since July 2024. Core inflation, which excludes volatile categories like food, energy, alcohol and tobacco, remains steady at 2.7%, the same level it's held since September, while services continued to be the biggest contributor to the overall inflation rate, edging down slightly to 3.9% in January from 4%. Energy prices, however, saw a sharp increase, rising to 1.8%, up from a mere 0.1% the month before. And despite the rise in inflation, policymakers are expected to maintain the course on lowering interest rates. The European Central Bank last week cut rates for the fifth time since June, reducing them by a quarter point to 2.75%. The move reflects the ECB's confidence that inflation will gradually ease toward its 2% target over the course of the year. Meanwhile, the European Union is expected to be the next in line for Trump's tariffs, but its leaders say they would be prepared to retaliate against the US. The warnings came after a meeting in Brussels on Monday, as Joel Flynn reports.
Quite what constitutes formality these days in Europe isn't clear. A meeting on Monday of EU leaders was supposed to be informal, yet it had all the hallmarks of seriousness normally seen in Brussels. It wasn't helped by the shadow of economic warfare started by the new American president.
We'll be doing something very substantial with the European Union. We're going to bring the level up to where it should be. And if you think of the European Union, then you go to NATO, it's largely the same group of countries.
Unsurprisingly, NATO leader Mark Rutte joined his former peers at the meeting that was supposed to focus on defence. Economics, however, rather than security, was likely to be the chief talking point.
If the United States and the US start the trade war, then the one laughing on the side is China. We are very interlinked. We need America and America needs us as well.
European stock markets fell on Monday in reaction to the news amid bets that EU leaders would respond.
It's simple. We think the priority is the strategic agenda and the security of our borders. If we are attacked on trade topics, as a power that holds, Europe has to make itself respected and react.
Both the US and Europe benefit from the exchange of goods and services. If customs policy now makes this difficult, it will be bad for the USA and bad for Europe.
If the EU imposes tariffs on the US as well, the implication for the EU economy will potentially be significant, with weaker growth and higher inflation. Being an important trading partner for the UK, that will have implication on the UK as well.
A spokesperson for the European Commission said the EU plans to respond firmly to any tariffs on EU goods, and the pain is likely to go both ways. Trump's comments have appeared to focus on goods trade alone. According to Eurostat, the EU exports more to the US than it imports, with a deficit of almost $160 billion in 2023. In services, however, it's the other way around, with a US surplus of around $106 billion. Some EU leaders appeared more hopeful than others that diplomacy could yet ease tensions. Resolving Trump's looming trade war for Europe, however, may take more than an informal lunch. Joel Flynn, TRT World.
Let's take a look at some other stories we're following. US President Donald Trump has signed an order to create a sovereign wealth fund within the next year. Money from tariffs and government assets will be used to raise funds. Trump believes the fund could boost American businesses and help grow US tech, as well as potentially buying the short video app TikTok if the deal is right. Elon Musk has taken control of the US Treasury's payment system, which handles $6 trillion annually. He says the goal is to stop fraud and waste by reviewing suspicious transactions. Critics are raising concerns, but Trump supports Musk's cost-cutting efforts. The US manufacturing sector breathed new life into the economy, with January marking a sharp rebound after more than 2 years of decline. The Manufacturing Purchasing Managers Index climbed to 50.9, while optimism for future production surged to its highest point in nearly 3 years. And for the 12th year in a row, Japan's food exports have reached a record-breaking $9.7 billion in 2024, up by 3.7%. The United States became Japan's largest food export destination last year. Despite China's seafood ban due to the Fukushima discharge, the growing number of foreign tourists and global love for Japanese cuisine drove the increase. But for people living in Japan, rising prices are making the cost of living more expensive. To save money, some people have started growing their own produce. Emre Boz looks at how this is impacting the economy.
For some in Japan, growing their own vegetables has become a new pastime with an added bonus. Not only is it fresh and tastes good, but it's become one way of getting around rising prices.
I didn't start out with my family's finances in mind, but when I think about how much it helps with the household budget, now that prices are going up, I'm glad I got into this hobby.
Since we started producing, we've been eating at home more. It's like we can pick these today, so let's have them before they go bad. We've got these vegetables, so let's make this recipe. That kind of thing. So the cost of living has changed, but the cost of our food has also changed a lot.
Inflation in the country remained below the 3% mark for the majority of last year. Then, that number skyrocketed to 3.6% year-on-year in December. Analysts expect inflation to fall back to 3.2% by the end of this quarter, still well above the Bank of Japan's 2% target. The central bank has acted by raising interest rates to their highest level in 17 years, from 0.25% to 0.5% in January. This is designed to make borrowing more expensive and reduce spending.
When looking at the current state of the economy, there are some signs of weakness, but it's recovering moderately. In terms of wages, corporate earnings are continuing to improve, and there's a growing sense of labor shortages. There were many calls for wage increases at this year's spring labor management negotiations, as they were last year.
Japan's GDP growth has been lackluster since 2023, twice dipping to negative growth. Last year, it began to grow, but the numbers slowed to 0.3% in the third quarter. For the last 40 years, private consumption in Japan accounted for more than 54% of nominal GDP in Japan, being a very important engine for the country's economic growth. Throughout much of that time, the country's economy was stuck in a deflationary spiral, a rare scenario in a modern economy, with consumption and prices both stagnant. The fear is that it could return if the Bank of Japan doesn't get its balance right. But with the country facing rising prices, the BOJ may have no other choice but to sacrifice growth. Emre Boz, TRT World.
And for more, we're joined by Seijiro Takeshita, Professor at the School of Management and Information at the University of Shizuoka. Thanks for being with us, Professor. So what's behind the skyrocketing inflation in Japan at the moment, and how has growing their own vegetables helped families relieve some of that pressure?
Well, actually, to answer your first question, it's obviously cost-push inflation caused by partly because of the energy prices, but also very much due to the weakening of the yen. So these two factors have exacerbated the situation, and basically that's the biggest cause. And also, unfortunately for food side, we've had some very, very unfortunate summer, which has been extremely hot, meaning that quite a lot of fresh foods has been very high. The cabbages are twice as high, and many of things like apples and tomatoes, these basic foodstuffs have skyrocketed in many areas. So that is hurting the household. Now, to answer your second question, the answer is no, because yes, as you just reported, we do have some people that are basically protecting their, I should say, spending patterns. But people aren't regressing back to farming. What they're doing is cutting down severely on things like clothing, or cutting down on the area of foodstuff. For example, the beef consumption and also even pork has declined quite substantially over the years, and they've shifted to chicken, which is a lot more affordable. So we are seeing those kind of transitions taking place within the spending patterns. But, it's not that, this house farming is taking off big time, although, as you reported, I think it's a very good idea. Fresh and cheap, so why not?
Right, and the Bank of Japan has raised rates to the highest level in about 17 years. How is this impacting consumption?
Not much yet, because I would say it's not a rate rise, but it's more like a normalization of rates, as we had this, incredible years of zero or minus, rates. So it's not really hurting, the Japanese spending patterns yet. Now, what we have to see is the wage rise taking place in Japan, because, well, partly because we had 2 decades of deflation, and that's one of the reasons why the corporations were able to get away with a surprising minus 2% increase or minus 2% decrease over the past 25 years on wages in Japan. That has to basically change in order for propensity to spending by the individuals to start going up. In comparison to this, just remind you, UK has gone up by 42% and US by 34%. So obviously we need a lot of catching up to do. Of course, we had deflation, et cetera, et cetera. But, the corporations must start, basically inducing the spending patterns by increasing the real wages in Japan.
Okay, Professor Seijiro Takashita from the University of Shizuoka. We will have to leave it there. Thank you very much for joining us. Now, Donald Trump has called the leaders of the US Agency for International Development criminal lunatics. Elon Musk has also chimed in, saying it's time for the government aid agency to shut down. From Nigeria to Ukraine, health and education NGOs are concerned after the US administration froze all aid spending for at least 3 months. Bassam Buneni has more.
USAID is the largest aid supplier in the world. But Donald Trump has now frozen all of its spending, and he is considering dissolving the agency and integrating it into the State Department.
It's been run by a bunch of radical lunatics, and we're getting them out. USAID, run by radical lunatics, and we're getting them out, and then we'll make a decision.
Prior to the US president's statement, Elon Musk called the agency a criminal organization, adding that it was time for it to die. USAID was founded in 1961 and has been since seen as key to US soft power. USAID manages a budget of over $42 billion, with scores of governments across the world depending on its valuable assistance. Trump gave unlimited powers to Elon Musk's Department of Government Efficiency to upend any government outlay he sees as wasteful. The impact on the global health system could be immense.
The world should worry about the ascension of Trump. Do you think, look at what is done, WHO, how can America withdraw from WHO? The only thing he thinks about is the money they put in there, or not the benefits that accrues and the goodwill that accrues to America through that little thing. The world is in trouble.
In war-torn Ukraine, the main affected stakeholders are looking for alternatives.
Yes, we'll look for additional opportunities, leave our comfort zone. We've already left it, and we're now going to look for funding abroad, which we didn't do before.
Vital needs, the United Nations say, should be spared.
The Secretary General looks forward to engaging with the new United States administration on the provision of much-needed development support to people grappling with the most difficult challenges confronting the developing world. The United States is one of the largest aid providers, and it is vital that we work constructively to jointly shape a strategic push forward.
The actions of Donald Trump at the beginning of his second term are already reverberating around the world. The US president doesn't seem to be holding back with what his critics call hawkish plans. Bassam Buneni, TRT World.
Syria's transitional president will visit Turkey on Tuesday for only his second international trip. The two neighbours have stronger ties since the re-establishment of relations after the fall of the Assad regime, and talks will focus on improving cooperation. Ankara is one of the key players making sure the transitional government succeeds. Our diplomatic correspondent Andrew Hopkins reports.
The overthrow of Bashar al-Assad was a cause for great celebration for many Syrians. But it also revealed the scale of the task ahead to rebuild the country, a job for which the Turkish government has offered wide-ranging support and has arguably been the most active in the international community.
The damage caused to Syria by the 13-year massacre policy of the Ba'ath regime exceeds $500 billion. Our teams visiting Syria state that the reality on the ground is much worse. The reconstruction of Syria requires a comprehensive rehabilitation of the physical infrastructure and economic and social order.
Just a few days ago, a high-level delegation of defence officials arrived from Turkey to discuss military training and anti-terrorism cooperation. The Turkish Energy Ministry has also sent officials to Syria to see how it can help return electricity supplies across the country. And Turkey has also announced plans to work with Jordan and Iraq to help rebuild Syria and boost trade. The government hopes this will help create the conditions for Syrian refugees to return home. 2.9 million of them are still living in Turkey. Some have been there for many years.
The establishment of economic stability and reconstruction in Syria will contribute significantly to the stability of our region. It will make it possible for millions of Syrians to return to their country. In this context, I would like to emphasize again that the sanctions imposed on Syria should be lifted.
Question of how to maintain security in a country, large parts of which are in ruins, and which has played host to multiple armed groups and terrorist organisations, an issue that directly affects Turkey, which shares a 900-kilometre border with Syria. One of the biggest challenges facing Syria's leaders is what to do about the YPG terror group. It's viewed by the Turkish government as the Syrian branch of the PKK, another terrorist organisation that operates within Turkey. Contacts are ongoing with Syrian officials, but it's not yet clear whether an agreement can be reached or whether it will continue to be a source of tension with Turkish officials. Andrew Hopkins, TRT World, Ankara.
Well, that's all your business news for now. Thanks for watching.